the error code, the status code response that it wants back. So if it gets a 200, asking for cPanel, it would tell you cPanel. It will actually tell you web-based control panel exists on this thing. Whoops. Right? The second one is a little bit better, because the second one asks for /gwweb.exe !help =bad request, right? And then looks for could not find the file sys in the response. So that's much better. We actually look at very detailed responses coming back. If that thing comes back as a could not find the file sys, it will trigger and say group-wise allow system information and file retrieval. Right, is that only about 25% of the Nicto database have entries that are built like this. So we're sitting still with the problem that 75% of the rest is looking at the status code and is thus very vulnerable to false positives. Now, how does Nessus do it? Now, the information that's here is a little bit outdated. I don't want to go into how Nessus do it at the moment, because it's even a little bit worse than it is now. Nessus has a plugin called no404.nasal, right? That tries to address the problem. How does it work? Before any of the CGI type checking in Nessus runs, it basically asks for a non-existent file, right? And then it matches it up with a whole lot of set of different predetermined responses that it could get. And any response that it gets that was marked in that list, right, is now treated as a false positive. So that seems to be a good way of doing it, but it also doesn't work all the time. And what's the problem here? Well, the problem here is that it works fine when the actual response is, the response for an unknown resource is consistent, right? If that response is consistent, it works fine. But the problem is that certain extensions, if you're calling a different type of extension, for instance, .servlet, could be handled by another subsystem. And that subsystem might react in a different way. So your response messages is still a friendly 404, but it's not the same kind of friendly 404. Okay? And it could be that certain parts of the application within a certain directory is mapped to a different machine, right? And if that machine replies with a different error code, then you still get your false positives. Okay? So it's a start, but it really breaks too frequently. So what we actually need is we need something that doesn't look at status codes at all. That's totally status code independent. That is sensitive to extensions, so different extensions could have different messages, and that is sensitive to the location within the application or within the web server, right? Now, this is what Wikto does. I'm going to skip this slide. I might come back to it later on. The logic within Wikto works as follows. Okay, when we get a request, when we're asking for something, it could be anything, we try to, from that request, extract both the location and the extension of the request, right? We then request a non-existent resource with the same location and the same extension, right? We store the response for that particular thing. Then we send the real request out, okay? And then we compare the responses between the real request and the bogus request, but it's sensitive for extension and it's sensitive for location. If these two requests, the output of these two requests matches, if they match, then we know that it's a false positive. So let's take an example. There would be a NictoDB entry, for instance, called /scripts/showcode.asp. Now, from that, if we extract that, we know that the location is /scripts. We know the extension is .asp. And so what we request is a non-existent file, /scripts/moo.asp. Actually, in Wikto, we don't request moo. I think we request something else. But you get the idea, right? Let's say we get the response, HTTP 200 OK, your file is not here. This is clearly a friendly 404, right? We now request /scripts/showcode.asp, and let's say it's not there. We're going to get the same response, right? HTTP 200 OK, your file is not here. We get a friendly response. We compare the two on a content level, purely on a content level. And if on a content level these two things compare, then of course the test is negative. If however showcode.asp was really on the server, we would get a totally different response. And so if we compare the content, we'll get a different response, and it won't compare in content, which means it's a positive. Okay, where's that telephone? Right. So what does it look like? This is basically the, does anybody have a laser pointer perhaps? No? Anyone? Because I have one, and then I put it in my pocket, and then the switch goes on, and I walk around with this red dot in my, we don't want to go there, right? Okay, now this is fine. Excellent, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So if you look at this, this is basically the Wecto part of Wecto. What you have over here is a little button for SSL if you want to do SSL. And it then runs through all of these requests. You can see that there's a little button there that says use AI or use fuzzy logic, right? And that's basically the level that we set up, the trigger level, in terms of the comparing of content. So if the trigger level is set very high, let's just think about it. If the trigger level is set very high, it means we're not very paranoid. If the trigger level is set very low, it means that we really want to make sure that it's not the same request at all. So you can actually set that level. And you can then, while it's running, click the update button, and it will show you the results in this window. If we have time afterwards, I'm going to run through this. I'll show you how it works. So this is, in real time, shows you the request, and it shows you the response at the same time. Also gives you a description of the problem, and so forth and so on. Okay. Now, what were the challenges that we faced when building Wecto? Actually, it's really simple. It's not a big issue to build a thing like this. The only thing that was a little bit tricky was the extraction of the location and the extension. So for script showcode.asp, it's really obvious, right? The location is scripts and the extension is .asp. But it gets a little bit tricky when you have something like this. Okay. Now, what's the extension in that thing? Is the extension MDB? Oh, it's not really, because this thing is actually a parameter that's passed to a script. So in fact, the extension of this is blank. I do something, doesn't have an extension. What's the location? Well, I mean, there's the Unicode representation of a slash. There's 2 dots, there's 1 dot, there's 3 slashes. What's the location of that? It starts to become extremely difficult to determine exactly what the location extension of that is. Luckily, we don't have a lot of them. Okay, there's not a lot that's like that. The other thing that was not really tricky, but we kind of skanked out on, was the comparing of responses. I'm doing a very, very simple kind of correlation within words, within the, or characters within the different responses. It's an autocorrelation function. It's very simple. At the moment, it seems to be working fine. So I'm going to leave it until someone complains about it. And the rest of the stuff is actually just, you know, just coding. It's just programming this stuff into a kind of interface. It was really not that difficult. Now, one of the things that we like to do is we like to feed some of these ideas back to the community. And we thought that one way to do this was to also look if we can improve the scanning capabilities of Nessus in the CGI scanning. Now, most of the plugins that's looking for CGIs is using the is CGI installed KA, that KA is for keep alive, to determine if a CGI is there. So basically what we did is we took the function out, we rewrote the function, and that it doesn't look for status codes anymore, and that it only does vector style checking. And what's nice about this is the responses we can now store in the KB, which is the knowledge base, right? This is this kind of database repository for per machine within Nessus. So we can take the responses, store it in the KB, and then obviously we don't have to look at it again. We can just wait for it to be cleared when the KB is cleared. And it works really well. And we made it a kind of a drop-in replacement for that function so that you can just, you know, take that function, rewrite it, drop it in there, and immediately get all the benefits of that. It works really well. We've seen a very dramatic improvement on false positives where server responses differ in terms of location and extension. We're talking 8 false positives versus none. It makes the KB a little bit heavier, right? Because it's got to now store all of the responses per location and extension. So it increases the KB size with about 120K per host. And of course, the initial scan that you're doing on the box would be a little bit slower because we've got to send all our bogus requests. But afterwards, then we got the stored responses. Then it's really quick. We can maybe talk later on what happened to this when we submitted it, but I think now is not a good time. Now, there's some other cool things that Wikto is doing as well. And this is basically things that we just kind of put around this to make the whole integration, make the application integrate with different little tools that we have. One of the things, if you Google for Wikto, you'll see that it only almost gets mentioned for its capability to do Google hacks. What that we do is we mine directories in common files /admin/login.asp. We kind of mine for those files. Remember I said that one of the shortcomings of most of the other scanners is the fact that the initial CGI directories is not populated properly. So now when we mine directories, we can take that stuff into our Wikto scan as CGI directories. We also we use the same fuzzy logic principle when we're looking for directories, right? So because we have now the capabilities to know what are false positives and what not, we can use it very easily to determine directories, and we do that recursively. I'll show you in a bit. We can also do the other way of finding directories on a machine is basically also to do a mirror of the site. Okay, so you do a mirror of the site, and from the mirror you actually look at all the locations and you extract the directories from there. Now what's interesting about that is you can now take those directories and import those directories into your backend miner that looks for other directories within there. So to give you an example of that, if you, for instance, is a bank and your bank is called Tiger Bank, sorry, and your whole site sits under a directory called Tiger Bank, right? Then normally if you scan for administrative backend and you scan for /admin, you're never going to find it, right? But if you know that Tiger Bank exists as a directory and the whole site is located behind that directory, once you did the mirror, you're going to find /Tiger Bank, right? And if you import that then into your directories to check for, because it's recursively, it's not going to check for Tiger Bank /admin. And if it's there, okay, that's something you want, right? So we do that, and I'll show you how that works as well. We also have a thing that we call the Googler, which is basically doing directory mining as well. Basically what it's doing is it's going out to Google, and it's asking Google for, it has certain terms that it adds, and it basically just does a Google search and look at the results coming back. Now if something sits in www.tigerbank.co.my/tigerbank/welcome.asp, then of course I know that the directory Tiger Bank exists. Okay? This is really simple, but it works really well. The other thing that we also do, these directories can now be used as input for CGI DIRs, right? The other thing that we also do is, while we're busy with it, we fingerprint the server. So we want to get the true server version, the actual banner, right? And we don't look at the banner. We basically use NetSquare. Is the NetSquare guys here? Who's there? I know that they're at the conference, but okay. They've got a tool called HTTP print. We always joke about that because we call it HTTP rint, right? They have this tool, and it's integrated within Wikto to basically do that kind of fingerprinting as well. And then last, but not least, we do Google hack scans against the site using Johnny Long's database. And this is, you can automatically update the stuff from his site. The tool has the functionality to do that for you. And it's funny, people only read the last part here, they miss the rest.